Welcome to the Pun Show. I'm your independent host, Macklin MacLoogie. Happy belated 4th to all you Star Wars nerds out there. May feels like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Yesterday was Sunday, so today must be Pun Day, July 6th, or 7-6. That reminds me, why was 6 afraid of 7? Because Blossom's friend wasn't mature enough to handle a David Fincher film. Now I'm going to help you rip apart some common no-nos and stitch them back together into proper go-go's in today's installment of So-So. Number 1. Stop saying all lives matter and change it to all lives matter. Green, black, it's all Greek to me. Number 2. Instead of saying, I don't see color, try saying, I don't see color TV as being a selling point for motels to still advertise on their street-facing sign because the technology is so ubiquitous. Number 3. Rather than saying, I'm not racist, but, try changing it to, I'm but racist, not. It's fun and inclusive. Number 4. Stop citing your black friends as a way to win an argument when you should be calling black friends by the appropriate name, living single. Here it is, your pun of the day. I know it's tempting to say fuck the police, but maybe we should take a page out of Liz Estrada's book and explicitly not do that until they all resign. Here to discuss talking to your kids about racism, it's writer and mother, Pamela DeGregorio.
A lot of my writing is health focused. I write about a wide range of health issues, but some of what I write about includes child development.
Talking about race is something that not a lot of people are comfortable doing, and certainly a lot of parents probably feel an added pressure to do it correctly, and maybe that leads to enough of a fear that they decide not to do it at all.
It's tricky. I understand that a lot of people are hesitant or sometimes even like scared to kind of start to have these conversations with their kids. And, I think the caveat of that being that, like, I hear a lot of white parents or non-Black parents kind of talking about how this is something uncomfortable for them. I mean, I know you had a guest on your show recently who is a Black father who was talking about how so many Black parents and Black families, they don't have the privilege to kind of not have these conversations with their children. So I think for parents who are very sympathetic, for parents who feel like this is something that it's hard to touch or get into with their kids, but I think something worth taking note of is that there are so many families who don't have the choice to kind of say, I'll hold off on that, or I'm not going to touch that conversation yet. I think anti-racist is a term some people maybe like are comfortable using now, whereas 6 months ago they might not have heard of it, and people are starting to recognize what it might mean to model anti-racist behavior for their children and raise an anti-racist child. But I think, like, if that's the goal, then the stakes are too high to not start those conversations. I have a 2.5-year-old and a 4.5-year-old, and recently, especially with my 4.5-year-old, I can say especially, we've had conversations about whereas we've talked with her in the past and my son in the past about racism against Black people and the history of that in this country. But more recently, we've had like more nuanced conversations about slavery and the history of that, about police brutality against Black and brown people. Like, we've been able to, because we've already started having some of those initial conversations, now we're able to get a little more nuanced, and we could talk to them in an age-appropriate way. That's, I think, something that's really can help people feel maybe a little bit better about how to approach these conversations with their kids. And I think in much the same way that you would over the course of a child's childhood, that you're going to talk to them about big topics in different ways as they grow. You're going to talk, about how babies are made with a 4-year-old differently than you're going to talk with a 14-year-old. You can also talk about, racism and police violence against Black and brown people with a 4-year-old differently than you can a 14-year-old. And you kind of build those conversations. If you start those conversations, you're probably going to walk away feeling really good. I was nervous to talk with my daughter about, like, okay, we've talked with her about racism before. How do we talk with her about police brutality? We've made kind of a point in our home to when talking about police, because for kids, they're so often they're given a police toy as a gift, or there's police characters on TV or in a book. We've always kind of said, like, police are supposed to help people, but they don't always. We've always kind of brought it up with that nuance, but I was a little nervous to sit down and talk with her about, like, oh, let's talk more specifically about this in the moment. But we did it, and she had great questions, and I left being like, oh, I was more nervous about that than I needed to be.
Could you paint the picture for me? Are these sit down face to face, heart to hearts, or are these spontaneous things that happen while you're making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches? Like, how do these topics usually
Yeah.
come up?
More the latter. I think, like, when we were talking a little bit more specifically about, like, police violence, we were talking over dinner. So we were all sitting down and we were in one place and we were eating. But it usually is in the moment, and that can often be best in talking to children. If you are to shut down, or the child can pick up on the fact that you're saying, like, this is not okay for us to talk about, they start to realize, oh, okay, if we're talking about race and racism, they might think, oh gosh, I pointed out the difference between my skin and my classmates' skin, and my mom or my dad or my caregiver or my grandparent, they said we shouldn't talk about it. I guess we shouldn't talk about that. So it adds up also, I think, to missed opportunities, kind of, as a child is growing. They don't feel as comfortable asking questions.
How much do you feel like the parent should lead these conversations, and how much do you feel like let the child lead and just support the child's curiosity or the child's questions?
Yeah. I think it should be a mix of both of those things. I think there are plenty of ways in which you can provide opportunities for you and your child to have conversations about race and racism, for example. Books and other media are a wonderful opportunity to do that. When things are happening in the news, when you hear something your child said at school, there's so many things we can do, I think, in raising our children that are, like, thoughtful and proactive, but they're sponges, so they're absorbing things from us, but the world around us too. When they're asking questions, definitely responding to those things in the moment and doing your best in the moment. And I think if you don't feel like it went great, or if you make mistakes or you felt unprepared, do your best. And then you can always take a step back and then revisit that conversation later with your child, especially for people who feel like this is new, or feel like they're making mistakes. That part of it is okay too. I think that that's an important part, is recognizing that, like, if you are new to this, you're going to make mistakes, and to acknowledge that with your child too. I think in the same way that, like, if you if you lose your temper and you yell at your child, it's entirely meaningful and appropriate to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I raised my voice and shouted. I should have used my words to tell you how I was feeling. You want to kind of model that behavior for kids. I think it makes sense to do the same if you make a misstep, or if you, I don't know, are in mixed company and hear a racist joke. And don't respond to it in the moment, which you should, especially which you should, and you should model that for your child. If you feel like, gosh, I messed up, talk about it later. Don't just pretend it didn't happen. So a mix of both. I think providing those opportunities and responding to your little one.
I think that's so important. I don't think parents in general, teachers, authority figures as a whole apologize or admit imperfection often enough. And I think there's a misconception that that shows weakness. But I think kids respond to that humanity, right?
Yeah, and I think that, if you let your little one know that, like, you are learning in the same way that they are learning, and uh, I think it gives them kind of, like, the space and the grace to know that if they mess up, that you can talk about it and that they can learn and grow too. If you have a little one who comes home and I don't know, repeats something racist that they heard in school, you want to talk about that in the moment and correct it and learn about why they were saying it. And again, like, give your child the space to know it's okay. You're learning, I'm learning, we can all do better. Like, here's how we move forward. For parents who kind of, like, feel uncomfortable in talking to their kids, I think often it's not again, when they talk to their kids, they're going to step away being like, wow, I'm so glad we had the conversation. Good on me, good on them. This was great. You're going to be proud, to be a parent and for your kid to be a great kid.
The parents should do it for the ego boost alone, right?
No, but I think that some of that discomfort is people in a very necessary way, maybe starting to reconcile and come to terms with some of their own racist behavior, racist actions, biases, internalized racism, ways in which they thought they were an ally and haven't stepped up and, have been of much of one as they believed themselves to be. I think some of that discomfort, honestly, is often parents kind of coming to terms with some of that stuff. It's not just about talking, it's about modeling the behavior too. It's about reflecting on um, your own place in the systems of privilege that we all live within, and in thinking critically about how you're parenting, how you're moving through the world yourself, how you maybe need to do better.
Well, that about does it for our show today. Please donate to one or both of Pamela's selected charities, the National Birth Equity Collective and the Black Mamas Matter Alliance, prioritizing Black maternal and infant health and giving Black mothers the rights, resources, and respect they deserve before, during, and after pregnancy. I won't see you next week because I need to retool this show, so I'm taking a hiatus, or how Munchies would describe winding up in a stomach. Hiatus. I'm Macklin MacLoogie. I hope to see you soon, but like Ming Na when she drops your last name, I don't know when.